So hello, everyone. My name is David Hamilton. I'm the founder and chairman of the America's Future Series. And we're an 11-year-old speaker series that focuses on issues impacting U.S. global competitiveness and national security. And we host events like this, and we're very proud and honored to have worked with Capital Factory in the past. We've hosted events together up here in Dallas. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Really appreciative of what Capital Factory does, its outreach, its inclusion, it's sort of being a convening authority and bringing experts together who have solutions that help America advance its capabilities, especially on this topic in the area of space. So this has been an outstanding event, and the last discussion was fascinating, and I think we'll probably pick up on some of the themes that were covered a second ago. So I'd like to bring to the camera Colonel Timothy Shaba of the USSF. I'd like to bring him on board, and David Shaw of Estrapi, and we're going to have a conversation about JADC2 and just the general notion of joint efforts and the ability to move things forward at a much faster rate. We all want to move the needle, and a lot of us, I think, like to say that we not only want to move the needle, but we'd like to break the needle off in our near peers' backsides. Pardon that expression, but failure is not an option, is it, sir?
No, thanks, David. It certainly is not, and certainly it's an exciting time as we look at all the innovation that's happening across the space community and across our Space Force. Now that we're into year 2 of the Space Force, but certainly, you know, JADC2, as we look to the future and how we intend to warfight, JADC2 or Joint All-Domain Command and Control is really the DoD strategy for how we move away from what had been historically kind of segregated and isolated capabilities and really start taking sensors and platforms across all those domains and across all the different services and really start to integrate and synchronize those together in a network fashion so that instead of individual efforts, we're really fighting even further as a joint network force for future potential peer competitors. As I look at, you know, what that's going to take, it's certainly going to take artificial intelligence, machine learning, the amount of data that's going to be available to decision makers in that type of environment when we have all those sensors and capabilities networked together. It's going to be underpinned by those types of technologies so that we can take the data, we can make it accessible to decision makers and really turn that data into decision quality information so that we're able to turn at speeds and operate at a time and tempo that outpaces our adversaries potentially in the future. So, you know, from an Air Force and Space Force standpoint, JADC2, that strategy, our effort right now is ABMS. ABMS is really how we start to bring the air and the space component into JADC2 in the future. Late last year, the department named the Department of the Air Force's Rapid Capability Office as kind of the lead for bringing that effort together. So those of us here at the Space and Missile Systems Center here in Los Angeles, where we're responsible for a large percentage of the DoD's space capabilities, we'll have a team here working hand in hand with the DAF RCO to really integrate in a lot of those space capabilities for the future.
Well, thank you. So that's a great sort of overview and explanation of what this entire conversation is about. And you guys are right at the heart of this entire effort. If you would, I'd like to do a little bit better job of introducing you, maybe, you know, talk a little bit about your background, your role, the command that you help lead, et cetera. And maybe you could give us a little bit more insight on that. But clearly the colonel's been a slacker. He really hasn't accomplished too much in his career, only went to Cal, et cetera, got a number of degrees. And you know, leads a team of 750 plus people who are really at the forefront of our efforts in space and missile defense. So if you would, a little bit, tell us a little bit about your operations there, you know, a little bit about the setup, what you guys do sort of day to day, and really, again, a little bit more about that mission, how you fit into the discussion that you just brought up into the overarching goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So here at the Space and Missile Systems Center, I'm the program executive officer for the Space Development Corps. So when you look at kind of the portfolio of capabilities that my team is responsible for, I have many of the next generation of capabilities, like the next generation of missile warning, strategic communications, tactical communications, you know, meant to drive a lot more protection to our warfighters. the next generation of weather capabilities, and then also a lot of our innovation and prototyping efforts as we move towards that more integrated architecture that I kind of described. That's kind of the foundation of JADC2. A much more integrated space architecture is part of that. And so my team also does a lot of the rapid prototyping to build out parts of that architecture that don't currently exist today, but need to be there in the future. So part of that is, DoD capabilities, but also we have a lot of hosted payload capabilities that we're working with a number of different allies from across the globe. Again, the strategy here is to make sure that, we really come as a joint force to include our key allies across the world. So many of our efforts are focused on really building out that capability, both for the DoD and also extending that to our allies and coalition partners.
Well, thank you for that background on what you all do. And you really are, again, I keep repeating myself, but at the forefront of where all of these things are coming together. And bringing them together in a joint domain effort is absolutely critical for our success. And you mentioned our international allies. We're going to visit a little bit in a moment with David Shaw of Estrapi, which is an investment group who also helps facilitate organizations, solution providers, getting fast-tracked, getting moved through the system, through the acquisitions process, through the funding process. And I think it'd be great for you guys to have a conversation about that, and how the investment community, how the entrepreneurial community, how the DoD, all this sort of thing come together to make sure that our warfighters have the capabilities and our leaders have the capabilities to integrate everything through technology. I think that would be great. So if you would, a little bit, in all of these things, I think we're all in agreement that this is critically important. It's a matter of national security that we combine forces and that we work together better, and that we're more efficient and we innovate faster, that we're able to crush cycle time, bring capabilities out faster, et cetera. And so from your experience, what would maybe you could give some examples of what you see as working, where things are progressing, and maybe where you think the focus should be in order to facilitate that and integrate and improve interoperability, et cetera, where you think we should probably be focusing our efforts most.
Yeah, well, over the last several years, I mean, there's a huge push to speed up acquisitions. Increased agility and speed, especially when you look to the future and knowing that there's dynamic threats that we face, and that we'll have to be able to be agile from an acquisition standpoint to stay ahead of those threats as well. So there's a number of different efforts that have been executed across the department that I think are very successful. AFWorks, which has really been a key effort as to how we bring small business innovative research, again, to bear against some of our problem sets and introduce the DoD to some of these small businesses that in other ways may not have actually found a way to bring their technology to the department and have us, try to leverage that. I think that's one great example. Another one that I'm pretty familiar with is the Space Enterprise Consortium, SPEC. So SPEC is run by my team here at Los Angeles. It's a consortium management that brings together, I think we're up to about 450 different industry players now. And again, when we look at that, about 80% of those, of that number is non-traditionals. What SPEC allows us to do, it's other transaction authority. So it really gives us the ability to take a requirement from any number of government customers. They come with their requirement. They come with their funding. They put out what we call an RPP, a request for prototype proposal. And within about 90 to 120 days, we're able to award new prototype contracts to any number of different players. So this first came into existence back in 2017. When we first awarded it, we thought it was going to be successful, but probably low dollar amounts. So we had a $100 million ceiling over 5 years. And literally within about 2 months, we recognized that it was going to be so wildly successful, we needed a higher ceiling on that SPEC consortium. So it was raised to 500. And then a little over a year ago, it was raised to 1.4 billion. And then just about a month ago, we awarded a new consortium management spec reloaded, we called it. It's 10 years with a $12 billion ceiling. So what that's going to allow us to do is continue to rapidly prototype new capabilities, reach into both traditional and non-traditional vendors across the space enterprise, and certainly, the growing capabilities across our commercial space companies is what we're trying to tap into, that innovation that, again, just a few years ago, we probably wouldn't have had the tools necessary to really be able to reach out to those companies and bring them in to work with the department.
That is fantastic. I don't think we can emphasize how radical a change this is. I mean, there has been an effort to reduce the requirements definition phase from 5 years, 60 months. And when I hear things like 3 months, 120 days, that kind of time to cut that cycle time and move this process forward, it's very heartening. And to a certain extent, I would argue that's a cultural change. So there's a great deal of that you could probably speak on. But I thought I might bring David into this conversation a little bit and say, from his perspective, you might give us a little bit of an overview of yourself and the work you do, but talk a little bit about how this change and approach and the process, et cetera, is making it easier and a huge opportunity for small agile solutions providers to actually fit into the system and contribute. Now, David, if you would, maybe a quick introduction and maybe you
Yeah,
can talk.
thanks. Thank you. I'm a co-founder of Estrapi, and so we've got a broad-based capability that addresses constrained bandwidth, capacity constrained, power constrained, interference. So there's many places we could go with it. So kind of in reverse order, and following on the Colonel's comments, and the speed with which innovation's being brought in is remarkable. So we would get intellectual interest, but no action. And I was in an event, came across the SPEC organization. We are a member of the National Spectra Consortium, so I understood exactly how that came together. I called the director of SPEC and said, hey, interested in joining. And his comment was, well, I'm sorry you didn't know about it sooner. We've got our general membership meeting in LA on Tuesday. And this was, I think, on a Thursday. Well, between Thursday and Tuesday, I got a membership perfected and showed up for that meeting, which Colonel Shaba may not remember it, but I met him in the concourse, just accidental introduction out in LA. What preceded that was we stumbled into one of these AFWorks special topics, and literally right before a proposal was due, it was a slide deck. It was short. It was brief. We got a email, I think it was about 2:00 one afternoon, saying you had won, but you got to tell us by 4. And it's like, well, who are these people? What in the hell's going on here? We applied to, affirmatively. We had a PO within a week, and start to finish, we were under sale within 5 weeks. So we've since won 3 different contracts with the Air Force. The iteration they're going through to bring in innovation in non-traditional companies is remarkable. And the point of the ceiling being raised and why you would want to be a member of an organization like that. Well, it's space comms, capacity and power constrained, and you've got the added burdens of adversaries trying to jam your signals and create chaos. So it's a very good fit for us. But more importantly, that it brings us in front of the end customers, which are very difficult to find within defense. It allows us to assess the problem sets from those who are crafting those problem sets. And then probably most importantly, it brings the right teaming partners in the room. So you've got several hundred of the key people where, you don't have to spend money traveling all over the country, knocking on a lot of doors with a lot of false starts. They're all right there with a management company that supports those efforts. So we've been very excited about everything we've seen. We've been involved with a couple of the challenge events, the pitch day events, and watching contracts be issued on the spot is something to behold. And now there's a whole, once you're in that environment, the ability to bridge between those smaller contracts and actually transitioning through OTA or otherwise, there's now supplemental funding programs that the Air Force has iterated over time to try to bridge that gap that I believe it's a TACFI and STRATFI that are capped at maybe $3 million and $30 million. So where I come from, 3 million, 30 million, and 12 billion is real money, right? And so we're quite active and interested, and it's remarkable to see with the speed. And by the way, I should dial it back even a little bit more. One of the first events, I'm in Dallas, one of the first events I attended at Capitol Factory, I drove down for an evening deal, was going to turn around, drive back, and happened to meet our AFWorks program manager at that event. Again, it was just an accidental engagement. It was really well organized, and went up and introduced myself, not knowing exactly what his role was, but letting him know that, we'd just won one, and we figured out very quickly that he was the PM. It's Captain Steve, now Major Steve Lawver. And it's just remarkable the commitment that everybody has to really speed things up and address these problems. And as for the JADC2, that's a big, hairy problem that we want to be a part of trying to find some solutions to.
That is great to hear. I'm sure, Colonel, that that's heartening to hear that it's working this well, right?
No, absolutely. And one of the things that I think David really highlighted with these new forums that we didn't necessarily have before is that interaction between the government customer and all of the industry base, so that you can have a dialogue about what the problem really is. It's one thing to write it on paper, but it's another thing to be able to sit down and then talk back and forth with a range of different potential providers, and really be able to ask some of the questions. What is the government really trying to get at? That type of interaction, which is kind of foundational to SPEC right now, is something that, as David mentioned, at our general membership meetings that we hold every fall, as part of that whole day-long session, there is planned activities in the afternoon that every new government owner of a requirement that is ready to release one of their requests for prototype proposals, they sit down and they conduct a 30 or 40-minute session. And all of industry that's interested in that capability, or anyone that thinks that they have a solution that could fit, is invited to be in the same room with the government customer, so that you can have a dialogue and really understand what the true requirement is. And in some cases, I think that also helps inform, the government side also, to understand kind of the broad spectrum of capabilities, and maybe some things that they hadn't thought about up front. But certainly that type of engagement is something that is significantly different. And I think it just leads to a better product and solution once we're actually able to award, because of that frank conversation that happens between the government and industry teams.
So it seems that a number of solutions providers and investors that invest in those companies are hearing the message that there is an opportunity, that it's not cumbersome, it's not your father's Oldsmobile. This is a new way of doing business. It is faster, it is much more responsive. There's real money here, et cetera. So how are you seeing the business community, industry, maybe even some of the mid-sized or larger firms? How do you see them responding to this? Are you getting enough of those folks sort of trying to tap into the system, get into the system so that they know how it works, et cetera? Or is there some work to do to make sure that that the world hears about this? I mean, when you hear that there's about $12 billion, you're probably going to get a crowd, but maybe not as big a crowd as we want just yet, right? So there's some work there to do to communicate this.
Well, certainly, so one thing, as far as the ceiling goes, I mean, that's kind of the max amount of money that all the different company or different government partners can eventually award, right? So eventually, we'll be at that cap, but that's why we've got a 10-year runway here ahead of us. But I think that as I'm looking at the prototypes that we've awarded, and I think we're somewhere up about 55 to 60 now over the last 3 years. And like I said, going on over $1 billion, and now we're starting on this new OTA. I'd say probably half of those have been awarded to traditionals, but even when there's a traditional industry player that wins one of the prototypes, they have to bring a non-traditional or many non-traditionals along with them. And I think that gets to some of the teaming that David talked about, the opportunities for smaller businesses to team up with some of the larger industry players. And then the other 50% are truly going to non-traditional players, right? So in all cases, we're expanding the non-traditional industry base. and bringing them into a greater fold across the architecture. And I'm sure David's got some other thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I do. It's and you can certainly clarify it because I'm kind of on the outside in on this, but an observation since we've been a member of SPEC is the down select. It isn't a zero sum deal. They're not issuing one contract. They may issue 3 contracts and have it step phase to go to 2. So there's not an award. They're looking for best of breed to come in and drive more innovation, which to me that seemed to be a radically new idea.
And I think what we're seeing right now is, again, we're seeing a lot more competition come to each of these RPPs. So again, in many cases, we're looking at some of our key risk areas, and we're saying these are the areas that we need to do rapid prototyping, either prove it, fast or fail fast, but really be able to bring a number of different solutions along the way to buy down risk, potentially come up with unique designs that are being provided, and then see which of those are the best solutions to go forward with. So as I look across much of my portfolio, and I know many of the other defense organizations that are using SPEC also, as David mentioned, it's not a one size fits all, one award. In many cases, we're awarding 3 or 4, and we're carrying those vendors through, significant design reviews, in some cases all the way through a full up prototype, so that we can really see which is the best solution. In some cases, we may need multiple solutions, multiple providers to be able to provide the capacity of some of these needs going forward for our future architecture, and certainly in order to service a lot of different customers across the Department of Defense. So, from those standpoints, the ability to be able to do that rapid prototyping and carry vendors much farther than we would have in the past is again, one of the many benefits that we're seeing from SPEC, and again, tapping into a lot of different capability. But certainly as I look at commercial space and where we're heading with that, I look at the billions that are being invested from many of these commercial space providers. As a government customer, I believe we're going to have to tap into that much more frequently than we have. And certainly look at our requirement sets and say, what can be fulfilled by some of the commercial space companies, and then really focus some of our DoD efforts on what is unique to the DoD and augment our capabilities to complement some of those commercial capabilities.
Absolutely. And so when you look at sort of the ratio, and I know this would be a rough cut guess, but you're seeing quite a bit of dual use technologies being brought to you so that you can use them in defense and national security. You see that percentage or whatever growing? Is there more and more dual use, or are a lot of the solutions providers focusing clearly on needs or challenges that the military has? What would you say is the sort of the combination ratio? Is it growing?
I don't know if I'd have a good percentage, but certainly, it certainly has increased over the last 2 to 4 years, far more significantly than, if I go back through my career and how we've used commercial capabilities in the past. I certainly see a lot more government services potentially being provided in the future, whether that be managed service providers for communications or some of our ISR capabilities and the broad spectrum of capability that's being provided by the commercial industry. Certainly there's dual use, anywhere from mapping agriculture to you name it. There's a number of different applications that certainly are on the commercial side. So those are the areas that we need to be able to tap into, again, from a DoD perspective, to be able to take advantage of not only the persistence that some of those capabilities may provide us, but also the quality of service that they provide. And like I said, where there's very specific, unique DoD requirements, that's where we'll have to continue much of our kind of create type mentality of creating solutions that are truly just government. But I think we have to find a way to tap into that large commercial investment, the capability it provides, the resiliency that it provides by having capability beyond just what the DoD is doing. And I think that's the architecture that we need going forward.
Yes, sir. So I really applaud that architecture of the military, the DoD, focusing on what it does best, trying to outsource, et cetera, offload the rest to other people who do that all the time. I think that's brilliant. Sort of stick to your knitting is a great strategy. And in the 2 or 3 minutes that we have left, we have a couple minutes left. I'd love for you to both just share very quickly sort of things that you'd like to leave the audience with. What should they really take away from the joint domain effort and the JADC2 and all of the work that you guys are doing in terms of innovation?
Well, thanks. I would just encourage anybody who's got a commercial use to look at the defense side of it. Certainly what we're doing is dual use. A lot of the commercial markets are quite a bit bigger, but any resistance to the contracting process or any of the struggles with defense contracting, I can assure you it's no different than the commercial world. You're just getting beat with a different stick with a different nail in it. And it's tough to move the needle, as you said, right off the bat with anybody. And it's a wonderful opportunity. And especially when commercial markets go risk off, right? Which we saw the last year. Defense did not go risk off. They adapted quite quickly to COVID and maintaining contracts in remote locations, which again was really remarkable, really important for us. So I would encourage anybody who's here interested in looking at to certainly take a look, because it represents a wonderful opportunity.
Yes, sir. So in the last 45 seconds or so, Colonel, first off, I want to thank you both, but Colonel, I'd like to give you the last word, and anything you'd like to share with the audience you think they should take away, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thanks. Again, as we move to the future, our traditional defense industrial base and now this growing commercial industrial base is how we're going to be successful. We've got to tap into the innovation that's happening across that spectrum. Certainly, I think there's a lot of opportunities. And as we look at JADC2 and a network architecture in the future, it's prime for small innovative companies to bring unique capabilities in and network those into the larger architecture. I think that's how we're going to continue to innovate and stay ahead of the adversaries going forward.
I appreciate the work that you're doing, sir, and your entire team. I thank them all for us. And I'd like to thank the Capital Factory for putting this on and giving us this opportunity. And I wish you all a great day. Appreciate your time.